Chapter 3 The Making of Man, Luc. 3:1 The image and nature of the Supreme Spirit reside in the soul seed of man, just as the image and nature of an oak tree reside in an acorn. The pattern for the mortal body of man was formed in the sphere of the Holy Spirit and projected to the sphere of matter and mortality where nature built upon it. When the time was ripe, the body prepared by nature was implanted with the soul seed of divinity, and the creature of earth became man. From that day, man, unlike all other living things on earth, became a twofold being in his own right, mortal in body but immortal in soul spirit. He is immortal only because he has been made the heir of divinity. And as such, all things are within his grasp. He is mortal because he lives within a mortal shell and is subject to a destiny in mortality. Luc. 3:2 I said to the being who seemed so near, whatever man was, when given divine life, it is said that he suffered a downfall or disinheritance. I heard the voice say in reply, man will not be disinherited, but he can make what he will of his birthright. The downfall of man was a fall from the sunlit heights of spirituality into the dark valley of agnosia. It was also a fall from a position of responsibility and trust, and man has yet to regain that position. Luc. 3:3 Man fell because he declined to undergo the necessary preparation and discipline needed by one who aspires to climb the heights. Also, he possessed the powers of creation, and being free could express them as he pleased. Man used them to satisfy his lower desires and so brought about his own downfall. Since then, he has no longer enjoyed them to the full. Given free will and the ability, it was intended that man should direct his own evolution, but he proved unequal to the task. Luc. 3:4 Man was intended to be the redeemer of reasonless matter and the controller of nature. For that reason, he was first called Lord of creation, but it was nature herself who dominated the will of man and tempted him to betray his trust. She lured him into entanglement with the senses, so that, instead of being free, he became the slave of desire. The sweetness of the bait disguised the poison it contained, and the spirit of man was dragged into forgetfulness and mindlessness. Luc. 3:5 Instead of being the master of a noble steed galloping along the road to immortality, man was now a blind creature bound upon a runaway horse. Notwithstanding this, he found the sensation enjoyable, believing that, in being freed from the responsibility of control, he had found true freedom. Man made little effort to assume control, for this meant struggle, effort and responsibility, and so he remained in the state of spiritual inertia called the mire of matter. The soul spirit had entered the body, only to be caught in the toils of the flesh. Man was heading in the wrong direction, and the way was all uphill. Luc. 3:6 So now you see, the voice continued, that man was made a twofold being. Within, though this is a misleading description, is the soul spirit, but to all outward appearances, man is a mortal shell subject to decay. Though born to a heritage of divinity, man himself has freely chosen to suffer as the slave of his desires and the vassal of his weakness. He has bartered his spiritual birthright for a handful of fragile material baubles. Man, becoming enamored of the glitter from the first bauble offered, has lost his sense of values and has closed his eyes to things of real value. He has drunk the material waters of spiritual oblivion and now lies asleep beside the stagnant pool. He slumbers, awaiting the day of the awakener, who dominated the will of man and tempted him to betray his trust. She lured him into entanglement with the senses, so that, instead of being free, he became the slave of desire. The sweetness of the bait disguised the poison it contained, and the spirit of man was dragged into forgetfulness and mindlessness. Luc. 3:5 Instead of being the master of a noble steed galloping along the road to immortality, man was now a blind creature bound upon a runaway horse. Notwithstanding this, he found the sensation enjoyable, believing that, in being freed from the responsibility of control, he had found true freedom. Man made little effort to assume control, for this meant struggle, effort and responsibility, and so he remained in the state of spiritual inertia called the mire of matter. The soul spirit had entered the body, only to be caught in the toils of the flesh. Man was heading in the wrong direction, and the way was all uphill. Luc. 3:6. So now you see, the voice continued, that man was made a twofold being. Within, though this is a misleading description, is the soul spirit, but to all outward appearances, man is a mortal shell subject to decay. Though born to a heritage of divinity, man himself has freely chosen to suffer as the slave of his desires and the vassal of his weakness. He has bartered his spiritual birthright for a handful of fragile material baubles. Man, becoming enamored of the glitter from the first bauble offered, has lost his sense of values and has closed his eyes to things of real value. He has drunk the material waters of spiritual oblivion and now lies asleep beside the stagnant pool. He slumbers, awaiting the day of the awakener. Luc. 3:7. There were things I understood and things I could not understand, and I said to the good and great being, if the Supreme Spirit is indeed the essence of love and kindness, could he not have created man in conditions which gave him complete contentment and happiness, absolutely free from pain, sorrow, and restraint? Is all this suffering and distress really necessary? The reply came as though radiating from a being full of compassion and understanding. He could have created a perfect being and placed him in a condition of absolute contentment and happiness, but what purpose would this serve? Could such a being respond to love? Where could he learn its full meaning except in a state of lovelessness? Such things as love, pity, gratitude, mercy, unselfishness, and all the other virtues are uncreatable qualities which can come into existence only through experience. Nothing can realize itself through a state of purity and perfection. Only by contrast can it become conscious of its existence. Luc. 3:8. Pain checks man in the midst of senseless enjoyment and makes him ponder his fate. It causes him to turn his thoughts towards greater things and to reflect on the approach of death. Suffering, sorrow, and trouble are tests which, if passed successfully, qualify the soul spirit for entry into the greater sphere of existence. They create in him the qualities which are needed there. To those who realize that these tests and trials have a purpose, they do not appear too harsh. But to those who cannot rise above them or who blame the Supreme Spirit or their fellow men for what befalls them, the tests and trials appear as unnecessary hardships barely endurable. Luc. 3:9. Regarding restraint, ask yourself what it teaches and what qualities it creates, and then you will know whether it is necessary. Does not restraint also lead to greater enjoyment and appreciation? No man can say that the ordinances of the law really detract from the joys of life. Neither can it be said they are obstacles to the gratification of normal desires and the natural craving for pleasure. Read and examine them carefully. To what normal desire do they deny gratification? What natural impulse do they attempt to destroy? What reasonable pleasure do they prohibit, and what beneficial outlet do they seek to suppress? Luc. 3:10. On the contrary, the ordinances of the law seek only to elevate and purify the lower impulses and bodily desires by controlling them, with wise limitations, seeking only to subordinate them when it serves a greater good. Mortal cravings are made subject to higher aims, while lust and carnal passions are transmuted into useful material for constructing the glorious palace of love. Luc. 3:11. The ordinances of the law are a means of guiding the evolving man towards beneficial and necessary ends. They unyieldingly oppose the bestial urges and the craving for harmful pleasures. They oppose the tendency towards mortal inertia which expresses itself in apathy and indifference, in the search for comfort and ease. There are things which, though harmful, they do not absolutely forbid and seek instead to utilize towards a good end. Luc. 3:12. I said, this I understand, if the world was created to serve man, then its fate depends upon his conduct. Chapter 4. Man, Bond and Free. Luc. 4:1. These things were revealed to me in the days of my youth, while I was still pure-minded and unsullied by the world. For I like primal man, was tempted and fell, but though my descent took no more than a few days, the way back took twice as many years. Yet the things I learned when elevated in spirit to the sphere above have always remained clear in my mind. If then you ask, why did I who had been granted this vision fall from grace, let me say that the pitfall was well and artfully covered. It was not baited by things that usually tempt, but by imitations and representations of things which usually inspire the best in men. Man is a crafty fish not easily caught, and the hook must be carefully concealed and the bait well chosen. Luc. 4:2 My friends, it would serve no purpose for me to tell the tale of my own fall, for never are two birds brought down by the same arrow. It serves better to tell what I learned in the sphere of the Holy Spirit, and this is what I discovered about man fallen into bondage, or into slumber. Luc. 4:3 The Supreme Spirit communicated with man through the Holy Spirit, and the message was that he should multiply and cover the earth. Man was told to never forget that he was the custodian of his race and the designer of his earthly dominion. He was also told that submission to carnal desires meant spiritual death, and that love is a lady worthy of the greatest respect, and not a menial serving maid attending to the demands of a master. Those were the things man was told, but he gave heed only to the first. Luc. 4:4 The man who has recognized his true nature has already stepped into the domain of spirituality. The man who has craved only for things pleasing to the mortal body and been led astray by carnal urges is lost, and wanders aimlessly in the darkness of moral wastes. His doom is to be devoured by damnation, the predator of these wastes. Luc. 4:5 The stern manner of speech appalled me, and I asked, why must the ignorant suffer dire consequences, and why is man not more fully warned? The voice of the Holy Spirit answered me, the ignorant do not suffer because they are ignorant, for that is the state into which they were born. They suffer because they are content to remain in that state and have chosen to take the easy road of effortlessly. The consequences of ignorance alone are not so dire. It is wickedness, chosen either deliberately or unthinkingly, that damns a man. What he suffers is not a punishment but the natural consequence of his actions. If a man places his hand upon a hot iron and is burnt, the pain is not a punishment but the consequence of his actions. If a man cuts himself, he must expect to bleed, and if he walks through mud, he cannot expect to remain unsoiled. Luc. 4:6 Those who seek refuge in the darkness do so not because they are condemned to suffer in this manner, but because it is the only place in which such as they can live. The worm does not seek the sunlight, or the leech find refuge in anything except slime. All things are drawn into conditions with which they have an affinity. That is a law of nature, as well as a greater law. Man is sufficiently warned, for the light has never been denied those who seek it earnestly, and everything about him proclaims the law of affinity. Luc. 4:7 I understood the words of the Holy Spirit, and I was told other things which I may tell you, but you must not record them in writing. 1. Instruction I was given, I now hand on to you. This is the choice: too much regard for the mortal body and craven submission to its demands and desires, a craving for sensual pleasure and surrender to the lures of ease and luxury, enslave man in the sphere of matter and mortality. He is held captive, exiled, by his own choice from his true homeland. Such men are the slaves of mortality. Or man can free his own true self waiting to greet him. The humiliating fetters of mortal bondage are then exchanged for the dignity of divine vestments. Man has the choice: he can be bond or free. Luc. 4:8 Bondage means abject submission to something more powerful than yourself, while freedom entails the acceptance of responsibility and the expenditure of unenforced effort. The choice is before every man. Each has perfect freedom of choice and may accept the challenge of his nature or decline to do so. But upon his choice will follow happiness or misery, survival, or destruction. As you have read, man is capable of righteousness, and is called upon to be righteous. Luc. 4:9 I thought of these things, and saw the working of a natural law, where each cause was followed by its own effect and consequence. I thought, too, of these things written in the good books, and said, I have read, let the man who has a soul spirit awaken it. Have not all men soul and spirit? The voice of the Holy Spirit said, all men are souls within a spirit, for the spirit and soul are not one and the same. To the souls who earnestly struggle towards spiritual unfolding, the Holy Spirit comes to reinforce the powers of the Spirit. The presence of the Holy Spirit supports them and, because of this, is called the Comforter, though more often, this is used to describe an earthly comforter. Luc. 4:10, even before the soul spirit departs from its earthly habitation. The Holy Spirit is there to comfort, for it is the guardian at the gates. But the Holy Spirit does not come near to the servants of evil and the wicked ones, for it has no affinity with them. Those who spent their earthly lives in bondage to the senses and bowed to mortal allurements, those who accepted their state with servility and paid homage to ease and luxury, have no affinity with the light in the sphere of the Holy Spirit. Luc. 4:11 I spoke to the good and great being who personalized the Holy Spirit, and said, tell me the manner in which I shall enter the sphere of the Holy Spirit. The answer came, not in a voice that beat against the ears, but as a melodious note struck on the chords of responsive understanding within. When the mortal material body is abandoned to dissolution at death, the form you once had no longer exists. The vital breath goes out in one gasp, and devitalized, returns to mingle with the air. All mortal things return to their own sphere. What passes over and enters the sphere of the Holy Spirit is the soul spirit with all its energies and containing an intangible design of etheric framework upon which the new being will be molded. Just as the acorn contains the design of the oak and the seed of man the design for his body, so does the soul spirit contain within itself the design for its own unfolding. Luc. 4:12 Entering the higher sphere, all mortal remnants will be discarded, and, looking upward, the soul spirit, freed into eternity, will see the glory above. All the spiritual powers will be gathered about it and may be possessed. The song of the newcomer will greet the newly arrived soul spirit, welcome into our company, for we are your compatible companions and all one with you. Luc. 4:13 I spoke again to the Holy Spirit and said, it seems there are many degrees in the higher sphere, where beings are separated into groups. How then can loved ones be found? Are all groups cut off from each other? The Holy Spirit replied, the divisions may resemble groups, but they are not parted by tangible or impassable barriers, for the thing keeping them apart is the law of affinity. The same law operates on the lower sphere, where some forms of material expression are so unlike others that one may be completely unknown and unmanifested to another. The grouping is no more rigid on the higher sphere than on earth. The law of affinity draws compatible soul spirits together, just as creatures on earth seek compatible surrounding and the company of their own kind. In both spheres, there is affinity and antipathy. Understand the laws governing these, and you understand the nature of the divisions in the higher sphere. Luc. 4:14 I thought a while and said, I understand, there are creatures of the light and creatures of the darkness on earth, and they are kept apart by their different affinities. A gentle lady is revolted by filth and sordidness, because she has an antipathy towards them, while the besotted drunkard or unclean bawd is not repelled. Luc. 4:15 The voice of the Holy Spirit was still with me, and I heard it say, this, then, is the end of the first stage, and here the tired wayfarer may rest and refresh himself. The first flight towards divinity has been accomplished. This is the end of material mortality, and the mists of agnosia swirl far below. Now, the conscious soul spirit can rejoice in the sunlight, above, Luc. 4:16 there, in the sphere of the Holy Spirit, surrounded by a form of glory which words cannot describe, and immersed in beauty as a swimmer is immersed in water, I was lost in rapture. I could think of no more to say, and having gazed on the face of reality, I would never more be a victim of doubt. The joyousness I knew can be known only through experience. To tell of it is as futile as describing colors to a man born blind, who cannot know one from the other by mentioning their names. Having glimpsed this glory, and knowing what is planned for each and every soul spirit, I was filled with zeal and overcome with the desire to awaken my brothers who lay wrapped in the sleep of indifference. I wished to stir them out of their lethargy and make them aware of the effort needed to attain glory. But in my enthusiasm, I rushed forward too hastily and instead of achieving my objective fell into the pit which always awaits the hasty and unwary. Perhaps it is well, for in my callow youth, I lacked the experience and knowledge of the ways of men, to have been a proper teacher. Luc. 4:17 having told me these things and granted me the vision of glory, the Holy Spirit withdrew, and I sensed, rather than saw, the departure of the good and great being. Gradually, I descended from the higher sphere, and awoke on earth with an abounding feeling of well-being. The sleep of the body had freed the soul spirit, and the closing of earthly eyes had marked the opening of spiritual ones. From that day onward, I was a new being,